Good morning. Martin Luther King Jr. is renowned for his speeches. Profound speeches that inspired, that brought people together, that lifted us up. Whether it was those who heard him back then or those who read or listen or see them now on video. They were speeches that lifted us into another place, bringing inspiration and hope and a bigger picture of life. His famous speech, "I Have a Dream," before the Lincoln Memorial, recounts that document signed by Lincoln for emancipation of slavery, and how that has struggled over the 100 years between Martin Luther King and when that document was signed. And standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, he proclaims hope. He proclaims a vision of justice. He has experienced this vision, this dream of God, and he speaks into it. His initial speech was written and well crafted and prepared. It was very, very good. But it wasn't grabbing the people. And Mahalia Jackson behind him, the great gospel singer who shared much of his ministry and work, leans forward and in a large whisper says, "Martin, the dream, tell them about the dream, Martin." And after this, a couple of times, he launches into that part of the speech, leaves his prepared speech and speaks about "I have a dream." The dream where his 4 children will be judged not by the colour of their skin, but the quality of their character. That they and all of us will sit around the table of humanity, shared humanity, and be equal. It's a wonderful speech that lifts us into another place. And it's obvious that Martin Luther King Jr. has had a vision, has encountered this way of God, has read and seen in the scriptures that he preaches from, the images and the profound stories and inspiration. And he's encountered this God and this vision, and he proclaims it. There are other speeches and letters and writings. There's another speech a few years later in Memphis, Tennessee. Having been in various cities to lead the civil rights movement, the particular non-violent protests and so on, and actions, he's there in Memphis to support the sanitation workers' strike and to rally the troops and bring people together and remind them of the courage that's needed, of standing together. Together they are strong. And he goes into Memphis, and he's due to speak in this Memphis temple, this great church. But he's not feeling well, a bit of a fever and a sore throat, and he decides to stay at his hotel room and prepare for the next day. But as he's there resting, his friend Ralph Abernathy is in the temple, is in the church, and thousands are gathered, and they're waiting for Martin Luther King Jr. to see him, to hear him, to be inspired. And it doesn't matter who else speaks, they need this voice. And so he rings him in his motel room and says, "Please come down if you're able. They need you." And so he drives down and walks into a standing ovation. And then he speaks relatively unprepared. He speaks of what's happening in their world. And he recounts courses of history and wonders, if I was able to be born in any decade, in any time of history, when would it be? And he goes through the early times of the biblical stories of the Greeks, of the Romans, of the Reformation and Enlightenment and other times. He says, no, if I had my choice again, it would be here in the 20th century. When so much change is happening, when there's so much needed in our world, when there's so much potential and promise, but so much desperation. And he speaks of it, and he speaks of being together and sharing this journey together and remaining strong. And asking, not what will this action do for me, but if I don't do it, what will happen to those people? And he gets to the end, and there's a profound moment. Let me read it. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system, "We're sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane. And to be sure that all the bags were checked and to be sure nothing could be wrong with the plane. And we had to check everything out carefully. We had the plane protected and guarded all night. And then I got into Memphis and some began to say the threats or talk of the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. What a powerful, profound vision and experience this man has had. And how he shares that with the people. In this critical moment of their life and of the movement and of this movement in Memphis, Martin Luther King Jr. has been to the mountaintop and seen over. He uses the image of Moses, the great leader of the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, and who leads them towards the promised land and gets to Mount Nebo and looks in and looks over into the land, but doesn't get there himself. He knows they'll make it, but he himself dies before they can get into the land. And Martin Luther King himself saw over, he's been on the mountaintop, he's seen over, he's seen the promised land, the vision that God has given him. And he may not make it. In fact, he didn't. The next day he was assassinated. But the vision was there. Mine eyes have seen the coming of the glory of the Lord. And then it's in these moments, these critical moments of life, in the life of our world or our lives or the life of the mission of God, that we need this hope, this vision of what can be and what will be. And I've seen it in the moments, the critical moments of people's lives, when they turn away from the things they've trusted, materialism and the things they can accumulate in careers and success and whatever else, because there's something deeper they know they need. In moments of grief and loss, of sitting in a hospital room, as one lies dying, I've been called in to sit and to pray. And of course they'd like the miracle cure, but I can't deliver that, just as the doctors can't. But I can pray the presence of God. And something happens. And the healing that takes place is the touch of the human heart with His divine spirit and life and hope. Or in the funeral service, where people reach out and want to minister, but they don't want the religion. They don't want the hard, heavy stuff. They want the life-giving hope. They want God. They may not say that in those words, but that's what they want. And that's what I try and offer. When I do well, it's not me, but God's presence is there. And they're touched. Or in marriage, as people are about to make this commitment to life, this scary, exciting, wondrous, confusing. Many want God present. They don't want the religion, they want the Spirit. Or in baptism, this moment of blessing a child, this gift of a child, this wondrous moment of gift and grace to acknowledge, and in the moment of vulnerability and not confusion but uncertainty, of hope, of dreams, of wonder, of joy, many need the presence of God on this journey, in this moment. And I guess it's in those profound, difficult, confusing, desperate moments that we reach out for that thing beyond us. And it's in those moments perhaps we're more open, we're more exposed, and this grace touches us, as it did Martin Luther King Jr. And in Mark's story of Jesus this week, we read such a moment. The first half of Mark's story is about Jesus going out and this mission to proclaim the reign of God in words and actions. this love of God manifest in the world, drawing people into this community that's inclusive and gracious and forgiving and hopeful and merciful and equal. This vision that Martin Luther King had of everyone being there together, a common humanity. And in the second half, it's a journey south to Jerusalem, the journey to death, this journey to the cross which will be a pivotal moment through which Jesus moves towards resurrection and new life and new hope in the world. And after sharing with the disciples who are disbelieving, because they see the Messiah as the one who'll come and rally the troops, the armies of Israel, and reject the Romans and restore the greatness of Israel, Jesus refutes that and points them on another way, the way of suffering and cross. And they don't get it. And as they begin the journey, he takes three, Peter, James and John, up a mountaintop to pray, to be renewed, to be reassured that this is the path, to be strengthened, encouraged and inspired. And whilst they're there, his appearance changes. It glows. He becomes bright white. And he's joined by two other figures, Elijah and Moses, and they're talking, the great figures of Jewish faith. Moses, the lawgiver, the one who delivered people into the promised land. Elijah, the great prophet. And they're there, and there's cloud and mist and this wondrous visionary experience. It's beyond the senses. And Peter wants to run around and hold it and build booths and contain it and keep it, but you can't. You've just got to experience the moment and be transformed and transfigured as Jesus was. And there's this moment of great glory and wonder when the voice from heaven says, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him. With him I'm well pleased." It's the blessing that was there at the baptism, the reaffirmation that this is the way. And the disciples hear it, and then the scene fades and the clouds disperse and it's back to normal. This moment of glorification, of almost seeing beyond into resurrection of what will be, but in this moment of life, of being, of movement, of journey towards the cross, Jesus is affirmed, and so are the disciples in following him and his way. And that's the journey they're on. I'm not sure what was happening for Mark and his community towards the end of the first century, in around the year 70, struggling under the persecution and the struggle of being this small, vulnerable community in a hostile world. A world where they expected Jesus to have returned and restored all things, a consummation of all things, the end of the world and the restoration of God's reign. But it hadn't happened. And there they are, struggling away like Martin Luther King's community. And they needed the stories of faith and hope to keep them strong and focused and moving forward in the way of God, in the way of Jesus. And maybe this story and these stories that Mark tells keep them grounded and focused, as they do us in our world, in our changing and shifting world where there is so much wrong and so much hurting and so much desperation and despair. And we need this vision of God, this reality, this inspiration to lead us, to help us, to guide us, to encourage us. And it comes again and again and again when we're open, when we open ourselves, when we listen to the stories of faith, the stories of life, the stories of people like Martin Luther King Jr. and many others. God speaks into our world, into our life, into our being, and gives us hope into this way of love and justice, this inclusive community where all are welcome, where all can flourish, and where life can be true. This is what we yearn for, and this is what God promises. Amen.